The dense forests of Germania swallowed the sounds of marching boots and clanking armor as three of Rome's mightiest legions advanced deeper into the unknown. It was the year 9 AD, and the autumn air hung heavy with tension. The trees, ancient and towering, seemed to press in from all sides, their shadows stretching like grasping fingers. Then, without warning, the silence shattered. A storm of arrows erupted from the darkness, followed by the blood-curdling war cries of Germanic warriors surging from the undergrowth. This was the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, a disaster so complete that it would haunt Rome for centuries. By the time the fighting ended, an entire army, some 20,000 men, had vanished into the mist, leaving behind only twisted corpses and broken standards. The Emperor Augustus, it said, wandered his palace in grief, crying out, "Varus, give me back my legions." But what truly happened to the Lost Legion of Varus? The earth itself seems to have swallowed them whole. No mass graves, no scattered remnants, no survivors to tell the tale. It's as if those three legions marched straight out of history, leaving behind only whispers and speculation. Some claim they were slaughtered to the last man, their bones left to rot beneath the forest floor. Others believe a handful escaped, fleeing into the wilderness to forge a new fate far from Rome's reach. And then there are the darker rumors of entire cohorts taken captive, forced to kneel before barbarian gods, their identities erased one by one, the truth. We may never know for certain, but today we're going to retrace their steps, piece together the fragments, and venture into the heart of one of history's most enduring enigmas. This is more than just a story of battle and betrayal. It's a mystery that challenges everything we think we know about Rome's invincibility, about the limits of empire, and about how easily glory can turn to dust. Those legions didn't just disappear, they left behind a question that has taunted historians for 2,000 years. So grab your cloak and lantern. We're heading deep into the Teutoburg Forest, where the trees still seem to whisper secrets and where the lost might finally be found. Rome at the dawn of the 1st century was an empire drunk on victory. Emperor Augustus, the architect of Rome's golden age, had turned the Republic into an unchallenged superpower, stretching from the deserts of North Africa to the rugged hills of Britannia. But Germania, a land of untamed forests and fierce tribes, remained a thorn in Rome's side. To Augustus, this wasn't just another frontier, it was the next jewel in his imperial crown. The Germanic tribes had no cities, no roads, no single ruler to conquer, just an endless sea of trees and warriors who fought like wolves. Yet Rome pressed onward, convinced that civilization would tame the wilderness. Enter Publius Quinctilius Varus, a man handpicked by Augustus to bring Germania to heel. A seasoned administrator with family ties to the emperor himself, Varus was no stranger to power. He'd governed Syria with an iron fist, crushing rebellions and filling Rome's coffers with tribute. But Germania was different. Here, there were no marble temples to repurpose, no local elites to manipulate, just a patchwork of tribes united only by their hatred of Rome. Varus, ever the bureaucrat, misread the land entirely. He taxed the tribes heavily, imposed Roman courts on Germanic customs, and marched his legions through the forests as if they were parading through the forum. What Rome failed to grasp was that Germania wasn't a territory to be conquered. It was a living, breathing adversary. The Germanic chieftain Arminius, raised in Rome as a hostage and fluent in its ways, saw the arrogance of his former masters firsthand. He knew Varus would never expect betrayal from a man who wore a toga and spoke Latin. So when whispers reached the governor of a minor uprising in the north, Varus took the bait without hesitation. 3 legions, their auxiliary forces, and a sprawling train of camp followers, nearly 30,000 souls, veered off the safe roads and into the labyrinth of Teutoburg. The irony: Rome had already won Germania on paper. Augustus had declared the region pacified, minting coins that boasted of its submission. But empires run on myths as much as steel, and the myth of Rome's invincibility was about to break against the roots of an ancient forest. The stage was set not just for a battle, but for a reckoning. For all its roads and aqueducts, Rome had forgotten the oldest rule of war: never underestimate those who know the land better than you. And in 9 AD, the land itself would rise to swallow an army whole. The forest that day was more than just a battlefield. It was a death trap designed by someone who knew Rome's weaknesses intimately. Arminius, the Germanic chieftain who had once dined in Roman villas and trained alongside legionaries, turned every lesson he'd learned against his former masters. The Teutoburg Forest wasn't chosen at random. Its narrow paths forced the Roman column to stretch for miles, breaking their formation into vulnerable segments. Thick underbrush and sudden ravines made retreat impossible, while the autumn rains turned the ground into a sucking quagmire, trapping armored men like flies in amber. As the first arrows hissed from the trees, the legions barely had time to raise their shields. Germanic warriors, camouflaged in mud and foliage, struck from all sides before vanishing back into the gloom. This wasn't a pitched battle, it was a slaughterhouse. The tribes used the land itself as a weapon, funneling the Romans into kill zones where spearmen and axemen waited. Cavalry, useless in the tangled woods, artillery, nowhere to deploy. Even the famed Roman discipline crumbled as officers fell, and panicked soldiers trampled their own wounded in the mud. For 3 days the nightmare continued. Attacks came in waves, each more brutal than the last. The Germanic tribes, though outnumbered, fought with terrifying efficiency, exploiting every Roman misstep. When the legions tried to fortify a hilltop, the enemy set fire to the surrounding brush, choking them with smoke. When they rallied for a counterattack, hidden pits lined with spikes gutted their ranks. By the final hours, the once proud legions were reduced to scattered bands, their red cloaks now brown with blood and filth. The scale of the defeat was unimaginable. 3 eagle standards, the sacred emblems of Rome's military pride, were lost. Nearly 20,000 soldiers, along with thousands of camp followers, were dead or enslaved. Varus himself, realizing the magnitude of his failure, fell on his sword rather than face capture. But the true horror wasn't just the numbers, it was the silence afterward. No triumphant Germanic songs echoed through the trees. No prisoners were paraded. The forest simply swallowed the evidence, leaving Rome to grapple with a chilling reality. An entire army had vanished without a trace, as if the earth itself had opened up and consumed them. This wasn't just a military defeat. It was a psychological earthquake that shattered Rome's belief in its own invincibility, and the architect of this catastrophe, a man who had worn a Roman name, walked Roman streets, and then used that knowledge to lure an empire to its ruin. Arminius didn't just defeat Varus, he exposed the arrogance of an entire civilization. The Teutoburg Forest became a warning carved in blood. No empire, no matter how mighty, is immune to the fury of those it underestimates. The news of the catastrophe reached Rome like a creeping shadow, first in fragments, then in a flood of horror. Messengers, their faces streaked with exhaustion and fear, staggered into the city with reports so unbelievable that senators initially dismissed them as exaggerations. But as more survivors straggled in, not legionaries, but merchants and camp followers who had fled the slaughter, the truth became undeniable. 3 legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, along with their cavalry and auxiliaries, had been erased from existence. There were no proud ranks of prisoners paraded through Germanic villages, no ransom demands, not even a battlefield to reclaim. Just silence. Augustus, the aging emperor who had built an empire on discipline and order, was said to have torn his robes in grief, pacing the palace halls like a man haunted. The loss wasn't just tactical, it was existential. Rome's military might was its lifeblood, and now an entire army had vanished as if swallowed by the earth. Worse, the disaster exposed the empire's vulnerability. If Germania could defy Rome so utterly, what stopped other provinces from rising? Panic rippled through the streets. Citizens whispered of omens, statues sweating blood, wolves howling inside city walls. Even the most steadfast senators began to question whether the gods had turned against them. The emperor's response was swift and brutal. He ordered emergency levies, scraping together new legions from freedmen and veterans, a desperate measure Rome hadn't needed in generations. Guards were doubled along the Rhine, and remaining Germanic allies were watched with paranoid intensity. Augustus knew the real danger wasn't just the loss of men, it was the collapse of the myth that Rome was invincible. So he did something unprecedented. He banned the surviving legions numbers 17th, 18th, 19th from ever being used again, as if erasing their memory could undo the shame. Yet for all his power, Augustus couldn't answer the question gnawing at Rome's heart. Where were the bodies? Most battles left traces, mass graves, discarded armor, the grim commerce of war trophies. But Teutoburg offered nothing. The Germanic tribes, perhaps fearing Roman retribution, hid all evidence. Some whispered that the forest itself had conspired in the slaughter, roots and vines pulling the dead into the earth. Others claimed scattered groups of legionaries survived, wandering the wilderness as outcasts or blending into tribal villages. A few even insisted they'd seen Roman prisoners in distant markets, their Latin gone ragged from disuse. The silence was agonizing. Without proof of death, families clung to fragile hope. Mothers lit candles for sons who would never return. Wives refused remarriage, waiting for husbands lost in the mist. Rome, a city built on closure, on triumphant arches and neatly recorded histories, found itself haunted by ghosts it couldn't bury. And in the quiet of his study, Augustus was said to keep a ledger of the missing, running his fingers down the names like a man counting scars. The disaster at Teutoburg wasn't just a battle lost, it was a wound that refused to heal, a reminder that even empires could bleed. For centuries, the only voices telling the story of Teutoburg belonged to the Romans themselves, men who had never set foot in those cursed woods. Tacitus, writing nearly 100 years later, painted the disaster in vivid strokes of shame and fury. His account drips with contempt for Varus, the doomed general who fell into the snare like a blind man, ignoring warnings from loyal Germanic allies about Arminius's treachery. But Tacitus, ever the dramatist, couldn't resist adding eerie details: Germanic priestesses prowling the battlefield, reading omens in the entrails of slaughtered Romans, as if the gods themselves had sanctioned the massacre. His version is less history than haunted parable, a warning about the price of arrogance. Then there's Cassius Dio, chronicling events 2 centuries after the fact. His telling is colder, more clinical, yet no less devastating. He describes the legions collapsing like a tower of bricks in an earthquake, their discipline crumbling under relentless attacks. Dio's Arminius isn't just a barbarian, he's a tactician, methodically exploiting Roman weaknesses. Where Tacitus focuses on Varus's failures, Dio underscores systemic blind spots. Rome's insistence on treating Germania as just another province to be taxed and ruled, rather than a land with its own savage logic. The discrepancies between these accounts tell us as much about Rome's psyche as they do about the battle itself. Tacitus, writing under emperors who still feared Germanic invasions, amplifies the treachery. His Arminius is a wolf in sheep's clothing, symbolizing the dangers of trusting civilized barbarians. Dio, removed from the trauma, dissects the logistical failures, hinting at deeper rot in imperial overreach. Both agree on one chilling point: the forest itself became an accomplice. Trees toppled to block retreats, rain-swollen streams drowned men in full armor, and when the killing ended, the earth seemed to swallow the evidence whole. Most revealing is what these historians leave out. Neither mentions mass graves or prisoner exchanges. Tacitus alludes to survivors whispering of comrades led away in chains, but admits even those rumors fade into speculation. The silence isn't just an absence of facts, it's a wound Rome couldn't stitch closed. By committing the disaster to scrolls, these writers performed a kind of autopsy, probing not just how the legions died, but how an empire so mighty could be so thoroughly humbled. In their ink-stained hands, Teutoburg became more than a battle. It was a mirror held up to Rome's greatest fears. Arminius stands as one of history's most enigmatic figures, a man caught between worlds whose name still sparks debate 2,000 years later. Born a prince of the Cherusci tribe, he was taken as a hostage to Rome as a boy, a common tactic to ensure tribal obedience. But Rome didn't just imprison him, it remade him. Raised in the heart of the empire, he mastered Latin, absorbed military strategy, and even rose to the rank of equestrian, earning the trust of his captors. To Rome, he was proof of their civilizing mission, a barbarian polished into a Roman gentleman. But beneath the toga and polished manners, something darker simmered. Was he a traitor? From Rome's perspective, absolutely. He'd eaten their bread, worn their medals, then turned his knowledge against them with brutal precision. The Teutoburg ambush wasn't just a battle, it was a betrayal orchestrated by a man who knew exactly how Rome's legions fought, marched, and thought. But to the Germanic tribes, Arminius was something else entirely, a liberator. His defection wasn't sudden, it was the slow unraveling of a man who'd seen Rome's cruelty firsthand. While the empire paraded him as a success story, he watched as his people were taxed into starvation, their leaders humiliated, their lands carved up for Roman estates. The truth lies somewhere in the shadows. Arminius wasn't just fighting for Germania, he was fighting against the version of himself Rome had created. His tactics at Teutoburg weren't merely Germanic, they were a perversion of Roman discipline, using their own strategies against them. He didn't meet Varus in open battle, he lured him, exploiting the Roman obsession with order and predictability. The Germanic tribes had raided Rome's borders for centuries, but Arminius gave them something new: unity. For the first time, fractious clans fought as one, and that cohesion came from a man who'd learned the art of empire better than his enemies. Yet his victory was bittersweet. After Teutoburg, Arminius found that ruling was harder than rebelling. The tribes, victorious against Rome, quickly splintered into old rivalries. Some accused him of wanting too much power, of becoming the very thing he'd fought against. In the end, he was killed by his own kin, a victim of the divisions he'd briefly bridged. Rome never forgot his betrayal. They hunted his family, erased his name from records, but Germania never quite embraced him as a hero either. His legacy is a paradox. The man who destroyed 3 legions couldn't unite his own people. So who was he, traitor or liberator? The answer depends on where you stand. History is written by the victors, but Arminius remains a rare figure who refused to let either side claim him entirely. He was Rome's creation and its nightmare, Germania's savior and its cautionary tale. In the end, perhaps he was neither hero nor villain, just a man who dared to rewrite his own story, no matter the cost. For over 1,500 years, the exact location of the Teutoburg massacre remained one of history's most stubborn mysteries. The Roman accounts gave only vague clues: a dense forest, impassable terrain, torrential rains, but Germania was a vast wilderness, its ancient woods long since carved into farmland and towns. Without physical proof, the battle drifted into legend, its details blurred by time. Generations of historians and treasure hunters scoured the German countryside, following half-remembered folk tales or misread Latin texts. Some insisted the clash happened near Detmold, where a towering monument to Arminius was erected in the 19th century. Others pointed to the dense thickets of the Wiehan Hills. But the earth kept its secrets until a metal detector's faint beep changed everything. The breakthrough came in the late 1980s, not from a historian's theory, but from a British amateur archaeologist named Major Tony Clun. Scanning a field near the village of Kalkriese, he stumbled upon something extraordinary: a scattering of Roman coins, all minted before 9 AD. Then came the real shock: a lead sling bullet stamped with the insignia of Legio Roman 19, one of Varus's lost legions. What followed was the archaeological equivalent of lightning striking twice. Excavations revealed a horror show frozen in time. Human bones tangled in the mud, iron spearheads still wedged between ribs, and the grim confetti of war-broken belt buckles, shattered helmets, even a horse's bridle twisted in panic. Most damning of all, a narrow defile between a hill and a peat bog, its soil laced with hundreds of Roman artifacts, as if the very ground had vomited up the remains of an army. Kalkriese wasn't just a battlefield, it was a killing floor. The geography matched the ancient descriptions perfectly. A natural funnel forced the Roman column into a deadly bottleneck where attackers could rain death from above. Crucially, archaeologists found no evidence of a prolonged fight. The debris field stretched nearly 15 miles, suggesting a running massacre where the legions were cut down in staggered groups, unable to form defensive lines. Even the weather aligned with history. Soil analysis confirmed heavy autumn rains had turned the ground into a swamp, trapping armored men like insects in resin. But perhaps the most haunting finds were the personal touches. A silver mask from a cavalry officer's helmet, a child's wooden toy dropped by a fleeing camp follower, a soldier's dice still clutched in skeletal fingers. These weren't artifacts, they were echoes. The Kalkriese discovery didn't just solve a historical puzzle, it rewrote the narrative of Teutoburg. Before, scholars debated whether Arminius's victory was luck or genius. The battlefield's layout proved it was both. Every contour of the land had been weaponized, from the artificially toppled trees blocking retreat to the camouflaged pits lining the escape routes. This was no haphazard ambush, it was a meticulously planned extermination. Yet Kalkriese also raised new questions. Why were so few Germanic weapons found? Did the victors ritually cleanse the site, or was the lack of their artifacts proof that they'd attacked with terrifying efficiency, losing few men in return? And most chilling of all, what happened to the thousands of unaccounted dead? Modern technology continues to peel back the layers. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed mass graves hidden for millennia, their occupants stacked like cordwood. Isotope analysis of teeth confirms some skeletons belonged to Romans born in Spain or North Africa, men who'd marched halfway across the world only to perish in a muddy German ditch. Even the coins tell a story. Many were defaced, likely by Germanic warriors mocking the emperor's shattered authority. But for all Kalkriese has revealed, it's also a reminder of how much remains shrouded. Less than 5% of the suspected battlefield has been excavated. The forest that swallowed an army still guards its darkest secrets, whispering that some truths are buried too deep to ever fully uncover. What began as a hunt for a lost battle has become something far richer, a window into the final moments of 20,000 souls. Kalkriese doesn't just mark where the legions fell, it forces us to confront the human cost of empire. Every arrowhead, every scrap of leather, every tooth clenched in agony is a rebuttal to the neat ink and parchment histories written by the victors. The earth remembers what Rome tried to forget, and now, piece by piece, it's speaking. The artifacts pulled from the soil at Kalkriese aren't just objects, they're silent witnesses to the chaos of that autumn in 9 AD. Take the Roman armor fragments, for instance. Unlike the pristine museum pieces we're used to seeing, these are brutalized. A breastplate dented by a Germanic axe, its metal folded inward like crumpled parchment. A helmet cheek guard torn clean off, the edges jagged where it was ripped from some legionary's head mid-battle. These aren't relics carefully buried in tombs, they're the shattered remnants of men who died violently, their equipment left to rust where it fell. Then there are the weapons, each one telling a different story of desperation. A gladius found plunged into the earth up to its hilt, as if its owner drove it downward in a last futile strike. A pilum, Rome's signature javelin, snapped in half, its tip still embedded in a tree root centuries after it missed its mark. Most chilling, the Germanic spearheads lodged in Roman shields, their iron tips still pressed against the wood's inner surface, proof they pierced clean through to the man behind. These aren't battlefield souvenirs collected afterward. They're frozen moments of impact preserved like flies in amber. Coins, usually so mundane, become heartbreaking here. Archaeologists found them scattered like breadcrumbs along the massacre route, many clustered where panic would have been worst, near ravines and mud pits. Some are clenched in skeletal hands, as if their owners hoped to bribe their way out of death. Others bear tiny slash marks from Germanic blades, test cuts to confirm the silver was real before looting. And then there are the countermarks, Roman coins defaced with Germanic runes, a deliberate insult to Augustus's image. It's as if the victors weren't just taking wealth, they were erasing Rome's very identity. But the most haunting finds aren't weapons or treasure. They're the intimate human traces, a wax writing tablet, its message forever lost to rot, still bearing the impression of a stylus pressed too hard by a nervous hand. A copper cooking pot crushed flat by fleeing boots, with charred barley crusted inside, someone's last meal abandoned mid-simmer. And the bones themselves, many showing defensive wounds, forearms splintered from blocking axe blows, skulls fractured from behind. This wasn't a battle, it was a slaughterhouse where the line between soldier and civilian blurred. Camp followers, women, children, left no armor to identify them, just smaller bones mixed with the rest. What makes these artifacts so extraordinary is how they mesh with the ancient texts. Tacitus wrote of the legions being butchered like cattle in pens. The Kalkriese finds prove it, remains of oxen and mules slaughtered alongside men, suggesting the baggage train became a death trap. Cassius Dio described Germanic warriors hacking at the trapped Romans from all sides. The weapon marks on bones confirm it. Identical chop wounds on multiple skeletons, evidence of execution-style killings. Even the weather aligns, rust patterns on metal objects match exposure to relentless rain, just as the histories described. Yet some discoveries defy explanation. Why are certain artifacts, eagle standards, officers' insignia conspicuously absent? Were they taken as trophies to sacred groves, as Germanic tradition suggests? And why do some skeletons show signs of deliberate burial, albeit haphazard? Were there moments of pity amid the carnage, or were the dead stacked like firewood to clear killing grounds? Each answer spawns new questions. The real power of Kalkriise's relics isn't just in what they confirm, it's in the gaps they leave, the spaces where history bleeds into mystery. These objects don't just recount a battle, they force us to confront the individual lives behind the numbers, men who marched under the same sun we do, only to vanish into the whispering dark of Teutoburg. The earth at Kalkriese still carries the scars of that massacre. Among the most chilling discoveries were the mass graves, pit after pit, filled with bones piled like kindling, a grim testament to the efficiency of the slaughter. Forensic anthropologists piecing together these remains uncovered horrors that even the ancient historians couldn't fully convey. Some skeletons lay in tangled heaps, their limbs interlocked as if men had died clinging to one another in the mud. Others were sprawled alone, their bones bearing the unmistakable marks of violent ends, skulls split by axe blows, vertebrae severed by sword strikes, ribs snapped by the crushing weight of fallen comrades. One grave held a particularly haunting scene, a cluster of men buried face down, their arms bound behind them with leather cords that had long since rotted away. These weren't soldiers who fell in battle, they were prisoners executed methodically, their bodies dumped without ceremony. Soil analysis revealed something even darker. Many graves had been dug hastily, often in low-lying areas prone to flooding, as if the killers wanted nature to erase their crimes. Yet the land refused to cooperate. Iron nails from military sandals, fragments of hobnailed boots, and even the faint stains of decayed fabric clung stubbornly to the soil, defying 2 millennia of rain and rot. The bones themselves tell stories no scroll could capture. Isotope testing on teeth revealed these men weren't just Romans, they were a mosaic of the empire's reach. Some grew up on the sunny hills of Iberia, others along the Nile's fertile banks. A few showed traces of childhood malnutrition, suggesting they'd risen from poverty through military service, only to meet their end in a foreign forest. The injuries paint a visceral picture of those final moments: compound fractures from blunt force trauma, spear tips still wedged between ribs, and in one particularly gruesome case, a jawbone shattered by what appears to be a Germanic war hammer. But it's the smaller details that cut deepest. A fibular brooch found clutched in a skeleton's hand, perhaps a sweetheart's parting gift. A leather pouch containing carefully saved coins, now green with age. The skeleton of a young man barely out of his teens, his spine twisted from what may have been a birth defect, proof the legions took whoever they could get in those desperate times. These weren't faceless soldiers, they were sons, fathers, brothers, men who carried memories of home into that deadly forest. The graves also revealed chilling insights into the ambush's aftermath. Some bodies show signs of scavenging not by animals but by human hands. Cut marks on femurs and skulls match Germanic tools, suggesting the dead were stripped of valuables and perhaps even subjected to ritual mutilation. A few graves contain fragments of burnt wood and charcoal, hinting at pyres lit to dispose of the dead when burial became impractical. Yet for all this brutality, there are fleeting glimpses of something resembling mercy. One mass grave showed evidence of lime being spread over the bodies, a crude attempt to speed decomposition and prevent disease, a small concession to decency in the midst of carnage. Forensic scientists made another unsettling discovery. Many skeletons lacked hands or feet. At first, it seemed like trophy-taking, but the truth was more pragmatic. The Germanic tribes, though victorious, were still desperately poor. Roman armor was valuable, but the leather straps holding it together were even more so. Cutting away hands and feet was the quickest way to remove gauntlets and boots, leaving the rest to rot. Even in death, the legions were stripped bare, their bodies reduced to raw materials. Perhaps the most sobering revelation came when researchers mapped the graves against the battlefield. They formed a macabre trail leading away from the initial ambush site, proof the massacre wasn't confined to one location. The legions had been harried for miles, cut down in pockets of resistance until the last man fell. Some graves held only a few bodies, suggesting small groups made final stands before being overwhelmed. Others contained dozens, likely the remnants of a doomed attempt to form a shield wall. The spacing of these pits mirrors the accounts of Tacitus and Dio, but adds a horrific precision. The ambush wasn't just a battle, it was a running extermination that stretched across days. These graves do more than confirm historical accounts, they force us to confront the human reality behind the numbers. 20,000 dead isn't just a statistic. It's 20,000 individual stories cut short, 20,000 voices silenced in the same patch of German forest. When archaeologists sieve the soil at Kalkriese, they're not just recovering artifacts. They're giving the Lost Legion of Varus what Rome never could. A witness to their final moments, and a voice that still whispers across 2,000 years. The forest didn't kill every Roman that day. While the battle was a massacre, history is rarely so absolute, and the fate of those who survived the initial slaughter is even murkier than the battle itself. Ancient sources offer fleeting glimpses of survivors, but their stories dissolve into rumor almost immediately. Tacitus mentions scattered bands of legionaries stumbling into Roman forts weeks later, their uniforms in tatters, their eyes hollow with trauma. Cassius Dio writes of Germanic tribesmen rounding up prisoners like cattle, herding them away to an uncertain fate. But what truly awaited those who didn't perish in the mud of Teutoburg? The answers are as varied as they are unsettling. One prevailing theory suggests many survivors were enslaved, a common practice in Germanic society. Unlike Rome's sprawling slave markets, Germanic captivity was intimate and brutal. Prisoners became personal property, forced into backbreaking labor or traded as currency between chieftains. Archaeological finds hint at this grim reality. Roman-style tools unearthed in Germanic villages far beyond the frontier, their craftsmanship too refined for local hands. A spearhead discovered in Denmark bears Latin graffiti, a legionary's name crudely etched into the metal, perhaps a final act of defiance. Even more telling are the Germanic graves containing Roman artifacts, not loot, but personal items buried with their owners. A belt buckle here, a signet ring there, suggesting some captives earned a degree of trust, or at least a grudging place in their captor's world. But integration wasn't always voluntary. Some scholars argue the tribes absorbed surviving soldiers outright, especially those with valuable skills. Blacksmiths, engineers, even medics could bargain for their lives by offering expertise their captors lacked. The Germanic tribes, though fierce warriors, had no standing armies or siege engines, knowledge a Roman legionary might trade for survival. There are whispers of darker assimilations too. Ritual sacrifices to Germanic gods, documented in later Roman texts, may have claimed some prisoners. A bog in northern Germany yielded a skeleton clad in fragments of Roman mail, his hands bound with willow ropes, a chilling echo of Tacitus's accounts of offerings to Nerthus, the earth goddess. Yet not all survivors faced chains or altars. Some likely fled into the wilderness, becoming outcasts in a land that despised them. The dense forests of Germania offered refuge, but at a cost. Starvation, exposure, or hostile tribesmen would have whittled away at these desperate men. A first-century funeral stele found near the Rhine tells a poignant story. It commemorates a Roman soldier who escaped the Teutoburg disaster only to perish alone in the wild. His name is lost to erosion, but his epitaph lingers, a ghostly reminder that survival didn't guarantee salvation. The most haunting possibility that some legionaries chose to disappear deliberately. Desertion was punishable by crucifixion in Rome, and with their legions annihilated, returning home might have meant execution. Better, perhaps, to vanish into the Germanic hinterlands, shedding their Roman identities like old armor. A handful of accounts from later centuries mention fair-haired, Latin-speaking tribesmen in remote villages, their origins unexplained. Could these have been the distant descendants of Varus's men, their bloodline woven into the very people they'd once been sent to conquer? The truth is fractured like sunlight through Teutoburg's leaves. For every skeleton found in a bog, there are 100 others the earth still hides. For every artifact hinting at integration, there's another suggesting brutality. The survivors, if they existed at all, became ghosts twice over, first to Rome, then to history itself. Their silence speaks volumes. In the end, Teutoburg wasn't just a battle that destroyed legions. It was a rift in the fabric of empire, swallowing not only the dead but the living, leaving behind only questions without answers. And perhaps that's the most unsettling legacy of all, not knowing how the story truly ended for those who didn't die that day, but somehow never made it home. The shockwaves from Teutoburg reverberated through Rome like a physical blow. For a society built on military supremacy, the annihilation of 3 legions wasn't just a defeat, it was an existential crisis. Imagine the scene, messengers staggering into the forum with mud-streaked faces, their voices breaking as they relayed the unthinkable: no survivors. No salvageable honor, just 20,000 men vanished. The streets, usually buzzing with the clatter of commerce, fell eerily silent. Markets closed. Temples overflowed with citizens begging the gods for answers. Even the most jaded senators, men who'd weathered civil wars and assassinations, paled at the news. This wasn't a setback, it was the empire's invincibility myth cracking wide open. At the heart of the storm stood Augustus, the aging architect of Rome's golden age. The man who'd spent decades crafting an image of divine favor now faced whispers that the gods had abandoned him. Suetonius paints a haunting picture, the emperor wandering his palace at night, tearing his robes, muttering Varus's name like a curse. Quintilius Varus, "Give me back my legions," wasn't just grief, it was the cry of a ruler realizing his entire system might be built on sand. The loss wasn't merely tactical, it was symbolic. Those legions represented Rome's ironclad belief in its destiny to civilize the world. Now Germania, a land they dismissed as backward, had exposed the empire's fragility. The political fallout was immediate and brutal. Augustus, desperate to project control, took drastic measures. He banned the legion's numbers 17th, 18th, 19th from ever being used again, as if erasing their memory could undo the shame. Conscription, a practice Rome had largely abandoned after its civil wars, was hastily reinstated. The draft targeted freedmen and even slaves, a humiliating admission that manpower was now more precious than pride. Along the Rhine, forts were reinforced with paranoid intensity. Legionaries who'd once marched confidently beyond the frontier now huddled behind walls, scanning the tree line for movement. The psychological shift was profound. Rome stopped seeing Germania as a province in waiting and began treating it as a land of monsters. Foreign policy transformed overnight. Before Teutoburg, expansion was Rome's birthright. After, it became a calculated risk. Augustus's successor, Tiberius, abandoned dreams of conquering Germania, settling for punitive raids to salve wounded pride. The Rhine became a permanent border, not a stepping stone, a line Rome dared not cross. Even recruitment changed. Auxiliaries from barbarian tribes, once kept on the empire's fringes, were now integrated into legions as buffers. It was a quiet admission. Rome needed those it feared to protect itself. The disaster even reshaped imperial succession. When Augustus died, his final advice to Tiberius was telling: keep the empire within its current bounds. The man who'd spent his life expanding Rome now begged his heir to hold the line. Yet the deepest scars were cultural. Teutoburg became Rome's bogeyman, a cautionary tale whispered in military academies for centuries. Young officers learned to distrust native guides, seeing Arminius's ghost in every smiling collaborator. Poets likened the forest to the underworld, its trees gorged on Roman blood. Even the shape of warfare shifted. Legions, once masters of open battle, grew wary of dense terrain. You can trace this trauma in Rome's later defeats. When Boudica revolted in Britannia or Judea rose in rebellion, commanders hesitated, haunted by Varus's spectre. The empire never fully recovered its swagger. But here's the tragic irony. Rome's overcorrection may have costed Germania forever. By withdrawing behind the Rhine, they left the tribes to unite without interference. Arminius's dream of a free Germania, though unfulfilled in his lifetime, took root in Rome's absence. Centuries later, those same forests would birth the warrior cultures that ultimately sacked the empire. In trying to bury the shame of Teutoburg, Rome planted the seeds of its own decline. The loss wasn't just a military blunder, it was the moment Rome learned that even giants can bleed. And once that fear takes hold, no amount of gold or steel can shake it loose. Long after the corpse-strewn mud of Kalkriese had settled, something curious happened. The vanished legions refused to stay dead. Not in body, but in story. Across centuries, whispers took root in the damp soil of Germania, mutating from campfire tales to full-blown legends. Farmers spoke of spectral figures in tattered red cloaks glimpsed between the trees at twilight, their faces gaunt, their march never ending. Travelers swore they heard Latin chants echoing through the mist, though no living throat could form the words. These weren't just ghost stories, they were the subconscious of a culture grappling with a horror too immense to bury. One persistent myth claimed entire cohorts had survived, fleeing deep into the wilderness to forge a hidden Roman stronghold. Medieval chronicles mention a city of the Lost Legion, where bearded men in corroded armor supposedly kept the old ways alive, their Latin slowly warping into a dialect no scholar could place. The story took such hold that in the 12th century, a German bishop sent scouts into the Harz Mountains searching for stone walls and toga-clad elders. They found nothing, but the legend persisted, perhaps because the alternative was too bleak to accept. How could 20,000 men simply cease to be? The human mind rebels against such emptiness, stitching fantasies to fill the void. Even the Germanic tribes contributed to the folklore. Oral traditions spoke of iron men who'd thrown down their weapons and married local women, their children bearing strange talents, uncanny skill with metalwork, or the ability to predict storms by reading the wind like a scroll. These tales often carried a grudging respect, acknowledging that some Romans had earned their place in the land they'd failed to conquer, but darker versions lingered too. Certain villages kept an odd tradition, burying a single Roman coin beneath their thresholds, a ward against the restless dead. It was as if they feared the legionaries might return, demanding their lost years back one stolen moment at a time. The myths reached their strangest heights in the Renaissance when alchemists became obsessed with the legion's fate. A German mystic named Agrippa von Nettesheim claimed the soldiers had discovered an ancient Germanic earth magic in the forest, using it to vanish into another realm. His treatise, filled with feverish sketches of portals and spectral eagles, argued the legion lived on in a parallel world, waiting for the right moment to rematerialize. Never mind that Agrippa never set foot in Teutoburg. His fantasy found eager audiences among those who preferred mystery to massacre. Modern pop culture keeps reinventing the legend. From cheesy 1960s pulp novels about blonde-haired, Latin-speaking tribesmen to video games where ghostly centurions haunt misty battlefields, the Lost Legion endures as a blank screen for our anxieties. Maybe that's why these stories resonate. They let us ask uncomfortable questions wrapped in fantasy's cloak. What does it mean to vanish without a trace? Can history ever truly bury its dead? And when an empire collapses, do its ghosts outlive its gods? The Teutoburg Forest holds more than bones. It holds our collective refusal to let the past stay past. Every rusted helmet unearthed, every shadow mistaken for a marching column, is a reminder that some defeats are too colossal to be confined to history books. They slip through the cracks, becoming something wilder, weirder, and infinitely harder to kill. The dense forests of Teutoburg have guarded their secrets for 2,000 years, but modern technology is finally prying them loose. Where archaeologists once relied on shovels and educated guesses, tools like LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar are now peeling back layers of history without disturbing a single leaf. Picture this: aircraft equipped with laser scanners soaring over the treetops, their beams piercing the canopy to map the forest floor with pinpoint accuracy. What emerges isn't just a terrain model, it's a ghostly imprint of the past. Faint depressions in the earth, invisible to the naked eye, reveal themselves as ancient trenches or mass graves. Winding paths too straight to be natural, those could be the very trails where Varus's legions made their doomed march. Ground-penetrating radar takes the search even deeper, sending pulses of energy into the soil that bounce back when they hit something unusual like a buried sword or a cluster of bones. At Kalkriese, this technology uncovered a chilling pattern. Hundreds of metallic anomalies scattered along a narrow corridor, precisely where Roman discipline would have collapsed into chaos. Each blip on the screen represents a potential artifact, a discarded helmet, a lost coin, perhaps even one of the sacred eagle standards. What's remarkable isn't just the scale of the finds, but their distribution. The debris field stretches for miles, confirming ancient accounts of a running battle where the legions were harried to exhaustion. But the real breakthroughs come when these tools collaborate. LiDAR identifies suspicious terrain features, radar probes their contents, then magnetometry measuring subtle variations in the Earth's magnetic field pinpoints iron objects like nails from Roman sandals or shattered spearheads. Together, they've revealed something startling. The battlefield was far larger than previously thought. What scholars once believed was a single ambush site now appears to be a network of killing zones, each carefully staged by Arminius's forces. The implications are profound. This wasn't a chaotic skirmish, it was a meticulously planned annihilation, with triggers pulled at multiple points along the route. Even more astonishing are the smaller discoveries reshaping our understanding of the Legion's final hours. soil analysis can now detect trace metals from bloodshed, painting a grisly heat map of where the fighting was fiercest. Pollen studies reveal the forest was thinner in 9 AD than today, explaining how Germanic warriors moved so swiftly between trees. And in a quiet lab in Munich, researchers recently used 3D modeling to reconstruct a shattered skull found near Kalkriese, revealing a fatal axe wound delivered from behind, proof some Romans were cut down as they fled. Yet for every answer technology provides, it births new questions. Why do certain areas show no metal traces despite being described as battlegrounds? Did the victors meticulously scavenge every scrap, or does the absence hint at survivors stripping their own dead for supplies? And what of the eerie voids detected beneath several mounds, potential undiscovered mass graves too deep for traditional excavation? The forest, it seems, still holds cards close to its chest. Perhaps the most poignant use of this technology has nothing to do with weapons or tactics. By analyzing isotopes in tooth enamel, scientists have identified legionaries born as far away as North Africa or Syria, men who crossed continents to die in a German downpour. Their bones, silent for millennia, now whisper fragments of their journeys. One soldier's remains showed signs of childhood malnutrition, then years of military rations, a rags to legionary story cut short. Another had healed fractures from a past battle, only to meet his end on a muddy slope. These aren't just data points, they're human lives pulled from oblivion. The true power of these tools lies in their ability to make the invisible visible. They transform legend into grid coordinates, rumor into spectral images glowing on a screen. With each scan, each drone flight, the fog of history thins slightly. We may never find every lost soul from Varus's legions, but for the first time in 2,000 years, we're listening, really listening, to what the Earth has been trying to tell us all along. The Teutoburg Forest wasn't just a backdrop for Rome's defeat, it was an active participant in the slaughter. Germania's terrain played tricks on the invaders from the moment they stepped off the Rhine's familiar banks. Unlike the sun-baked battlefields of the Mediterranean, where legions could deploy in crisp formations, this land was a living maze. Towering oaks choked sunlight into a perpetual twilight, their roots snarling like tripwires underfoot. Thickets of bramble tore at woolen cloaks and scratched exposed skin raw, turning every mile into an ordeal. Even the soil conspired against Rome, a mix of slick clay and loose loam that turned treacherous when the autumn rains came, transforming paths into quicks and traps for armored men. Weather proved just as merciless as the ambush itself. Legionaries trained in Italy's dry heat found themselves gasping in air thick enough to drink, humidity rusting their armor from the inside out. Sudden downpours, common in early autumn, bloated streams into impassable torrents overnight. Tacitus describes how rain-sodden cloaks dragged soldiers down like lead weights, while mud caked hobnailed boots until each step felt like lifting an anvil. But the real killer was visibility, or the lack of it. Fog pooled in the forest's hollows, reducing advanced scouts to blind men stumbling into ambushes. Archers couldn't see their arrows' flight. Officers shouted orders into a muffled void where sound died after 10 paces. Geography became Arminius's greatest ally. The Kalkriese Pass, where the massacre reached its crescendo, was a natural kill box, a narrow strip between a steep hill and an impassable bog. Germanic warriors didn't need to outfight the legions, they simply herded them into terrain that did the fighting for them. Fallen trees, likely toppled deliberately, funneled the Roman column into a snaking line where flanking maneuvers were impossible. Ravines swallowed entire units whole, their formations collapsing as men slipped down muddy slopes into waiting spear points. Even the wildlife turned hostile. Swarms of midges drove pack animals to panic, stampeding into ranks of already disoriented troops. Compare this to Rome's usual battlefields, open plains where disciplined formations could pivot like chess pieces. In Germania, their famed tactics became liabilities. The testudo, that tortoise-shell shield wall effective against arrows, was useless when attackers dropped logs from above. Cavalry, the Empire's swift knockout punch, founded in undergrowth that tangled horses' legs, supplied trains the lifeblood of any campaign bogged down in mires, leaving troops starving days before the first arrow flew. Every advantage Rome had honed over centuries was neutralized by roots, rain, and rotten luck. The tribes knew this land like their own breath. They moved through it as fluidly as the mist barefoot runners who could sprint across fallen trunks, hunters who navigated by the scent of damp moss on tree bark. While Romans clanked along in 60 pounds of iron, their enemies wore little more than wool and leather, their bodies painted with mud that erased them into the foliage. They didn't just use the forest, they became it. A rustle in the ferns might be a deer or a spear hurtling toward your throat. A fallen branch could be just that, or a tripwire snapping taut to send you tumbling into a pit of sharpened stakes. Most crucially, the wilderness eroded Rome's greatest weapon, unity. In open battle, a century's worth of men could hold formation through sheer muscle memory. But strung out single file on a path barely wider than a man's shoulders, with screams echoing from unseen directions, even veterans broke. The forest didn't just kill soldiers, it unraveled the very idea of a legion, reducing proud units to frantic individuals clawing at the dark. By the time the weather cleared and the sun finally pierced the canopy, it was too late. The land had already chosen its victor. And it wasn't the empire that brought roads, but the one that knew how to vanish into the trees. Varus stands as one of history's most vilified generals, the man who lost 3 legions in a single afternoon. But was he truly the bumbling fool history remembers, or just a convenient scapegoat for Rome's systemic failures? The answer lies somewhere between the ink of Roman historians and the mud of Teutoburg. On paper, Publius Quinctilius Varus wasn't some backwater officer. He'd governed Syria with ruthless efficiency, crushing rebellions and balancing imperial books. Augustus didn't hand Germania to an amateur. He chose a proven administrator with family ties to the throne. Yet Germania wasn't Syria. In the east, Varus dealt with cities that understood Roman rules, taxes, courts, the delicate dance of power. Germania had none of that. Its tribes owed no fealty to marble forums or legal codes. Their loyalty was carved in blood and soil. Varus' fatal flaw wasn't incompetence, it was assumption. He treated Germania like another province to be managed, not a living entity that would resist colonization. Compare him to Germanicus, the golden boy sent to avenge Teutoburg a few years later. Where Varus marched blindly into the forest, Germanicus relied on native scouts, moved his troops in smaller, agile units, and critically never trusted the land. But here's the twist: Germanicus barely succeeded. His campaigns were costly near disasters, saved more by luck than brilliance. The difference: Varus had no precedents to fear. Before Teutoburg, Rome genuinely believed Germania was pacified. Coins minted just months earlier showed kneeling barbarians surrendering to Augustus. Varus didn't ignore warnings. He had no reason to believe warnings were necessary. Then there's Arminius' deception. The Germanic chieftain wasn't some painted savage howling from the trees. He was a Roman citizen, a cavalry officer who dined at the emperor's table. When he whispered of a minor rebellion up north, it wasn't some shady informant's tip, it was intel from a decorated ally. Modern generals would have taken the bait too. Even Caesar, Rome's greatest tactician, had been lured into ambushes by trusted local guides. Varus' mistake wasn't trust, it was failing to recognize that trust could be weaponized. But let's not absolve him entirely. Other governors faced rebellions without losing entire armies. Take Quintus Titurius Sabinus, who crushed a Gallic uprising by refusing to leave fortified roads. Or Corbulo, who drilled his men relentlessly in Germanic terrain before campaigning. Varus did neither. His columns stretched for miles, civilians mingling with soldiers, discipline crumbling under the weight of complacency. The man who'd balanced Syria's budget somehow forgot to secure his flanks in hostile territory. That's not bad luck, it's negligence. Perhaps the fairest judgment comes from the ground itself. Excavations at Kalkriese show the ambush was too meticulous, too perfectly timed to blame solely on Varus. The buried evidence points to something darker. Rome's entire Germanic policy was a house of cards. Varus didn't just walk into a trap, he was handed a doomed mission wrapped in imperial ribbon. The real tragedy isn't that he failed, but that Rome needed someone to blame more than it needed the truth. In the end, Varus became the ghost that haunted every Roman commander's worst nightmare, the moment confidence curdles into catastrophe. The Germanic tribes that united under Arminius weren't a single nation. They were a fragile alliance of rival clans bound together by one shared conviction: Rome had to go. The Cherusci, Marsi, Chatti, and Bructeri had spent generations feuding over hunting grounds and stolen cattle. But when Varus's tax collectors began seizing their grain and his judges overturned tribal laws, old grudges suddenly mattered less than survival. What made this coalition so dangerous wasn't just their numbers, it was their intimate knowledge of their own land. These weren't soldiers following a battle plan, they were hunters turning the forest itself into a weapon. Guerrilla warfare came naturally to them. Unlike Rome's rigid formations, Germanic fighters moved in small, fluid bands, communicating through bird calls and prearranged signals. Their tactics were brutally simple: strike fast from concealment, inflict maximum chaos, then melt back into the trees before the legions could regroup. At Teutoburg, they turned every Roman strength into a liability. Heavy armor, useless when attackers dropped from oak branches onto unsuspecting columns. Disciplined shield walls, shattered by sudden charges from dense undergrowth where no orderly ranks could form. Even the famed Roman engineers found their skills worthless every time they tried building fortifications. Archers lurking in the canopy picked them off like targets in a gallery. The tribes exploited psychological warfare with chilling effectiveness. Before the battle, they'd allowed Roman scouts to escape with false reports of distant uprisings, knowing Varus would take the bait. During the fighting, they used terror as much as steel, painting their bodies in eerie blue woad, howling like wolves between attacks, leaving mutilated corpses in plain view to unnerve survivors. Most devastating was their manipulation of sound. By positioning war horns at staggered intervals through the forest, they created the illusion of being surrounded by an endless army. Legionaries swore later they'd heard thousands of voices when in reality the tribes were vastly outnumbered. Their greatest advantage, they fought like men with nothing to lose. Roman soldiers enlisted for pay and pension. Germanic warriors fought for their very way of life. Where a legionary might break formation to save himself, tribal fighters saw surrender as worse than death. Ancient sources describe mothers killing their own children rather than let them be taken as Roman slaves, warriors burning their villages preemptively to deny the enemy supplies. This desperation birthed terrifying innovations: traps made of bent saplings that launched spears at waist height, pits lined with fire-hardened stakes disguised under leaves, even drugged honey left along trails to incapacitate scouts. Yet what truly doomed the legions was the tribe's understanding of Roman psychology. Arminius, having served in Rome's auxiliary forces, knew exactly how they thought. He timed the ambush for late summer when supply wagons would be overloaded with freshly harvested grain, slowing the column to a crawl. He chose weather conditions: thick fog followed by torrential rain that neutralized Rome's advantage in visual signaling. Most brilliantly, he let the legions advance just far enough into the forest that retreat became impossible before springing the trap. This wasn't wild barbarian fury, it was a surgical exploitation of institutional arrogance. The aftermath revealed the alliance's fragile nature. Without a common enemy, the tribes quickly returned to infighting, proving Germania was easier to unite in hatred than in victory. But for those 3 days in Teutoburg, they'd rewritten the rules of war against an empire that never saw them coming. Their legacy wasn't just in the bones they left buried, it was in proving that no army, no matter how disciplined, is invincible against those who know the land like their own heartbeat. By 9 AD, the Roman legion was a finely tuned killing machine, an intricate clockwork of steel and discipline that had crushed civilizations from Gaul to Egypt. Each legion numbered around 5,000 men, divided into 10 cohorts of 6 centuries each. At its core was the centurion, a hardened veteran who commanded 80 men with equal parts respect and terror, his vine staff a constant reminder of the empire's unforgiving standards. Legionaries marched under the eagle standard, a sacred symbol believed to hold the unit's soul, and losing it was a disgrace worse than death. Their equipment was a masterpiece of efficiency. The curved rectangular scutum shield could deflect arrows and form an impenetrable wall when locked with others. The gladius, a short stabbing sword, turned close combat into a brutal science, and the pilum, a weighted javelin, bent on impact to cripple enemy shields. Add to this iron helmets with cheek guards, segmented plate armor called lorica segmentata, and hobnailed sandals designed for miles of marching, and you had soldiers who were effectively mobile fortresses. Yet this very perfection became their undoing in the Teutoburg Forest. Roman tactics relied on open ground where disciplined formations could pivot like chess pieces. The testudo, or tortoise formation, made them invincible against arrows but useless when attackers hurled logs from treetops. Cavalry, their swift knockout punch, floundered in dense undergrowth that tangled horses' legs. Even their famed engineers, who could build fortified camps in hours, found themselves helpless as Germanic warriors set fire to the very trees they sheltered under. The legion's greatest strength, its uniformity, became its fatal flaw. Every soldier moved as one, but in the forest's chaos, that meant entire units stumbled blindly into ambushes together. The weight of their equipment, so effective on Mediterranean battlefields, turned deadly in Germania's sodden terrain. A legionary carried 60 pounds of gear, armor, weapons, rations, and tools enough to sink him like a stone in the mud-choked ravines. Their hobnailed sandals, perfect for paved roads, lost traction on wet leaves and hidden roots, and when the autumn rains came, wool cloaks absorbed water like sponges, dragging men down as effectively as chains. Most crucially, the legions were trained to fight enemies who played by Rome's rules, who met them shield to shield on open plains. The Germanic tribes refused to oblige. They struck from shadows, vanished into mist, and turned the land itself into a weapon. A Roman sentry advancing in tight formation became a slow-moving target in the forest's narrow paths, where every tree concealed an axeman. Without clear lines of sight, their intricate command structure collapsed. Hand signals were useless in fog. Trumpet calls echoed misleadingly through the trees. Even the vaunted Roman discipline shattered when officers fell to unseen archers, leaving terrified recruits to clump together like sheep before wolves. The aftermath laid bare the system's fragility. At Kalkriese, archaeologists found piles of discarded armor, not stripped by victors but hastily unbuckled by legionaries desperate to flee. The very tools meant to protect them had become death traps. In the end, Rome's military machine, so formidable on parchment, proved grotesquely mismatched for the reality of Germania. The forest didn't just defeat the legions, it exposed the arrogance of an empire that believed its way of war was the only way. Teutoburg was a brutal reminder. No amount of discipline can outmaneuver a land that refuses to be tamed. The disaster at Teutoburg didn't just claim 3 legions, it redrew the map of Europe forever. In that single bloody week, the dream of a Roman Germania died, and with it, the empire's unshakable belief in its destiny to civilize the world. The Rhine River, once seen as a temporary border, became an uncrossable line in the sand. Future emperors, even ambitious ones like Tiberius and Germanicus, contented themselves with punitive raids rather than conquest, knowing the cost of taming those endless forests was too high. This wasn't merely a tactical retreat, it was the moment Rome acknowledged its limits. The ripple effect stretched for centuries. Without Roman cities, roads, or laws, Germania developed along radically different lines than Gaul or Spain. Tribal structures hardened into distinct cultures that resisted Mediterranean influence. The Gothic, Frankish, and Saxon peoples who later reshaped Europe owed their independence to that day in 9 AD when Arminius proved Rome could bleed. Even Christianity, which spread like wildfire through Romanized provinces, took centuries longer to penetrate these unconquered lands. The religious and linguistic divide between Germanic and Latin Europe, still visible today, traces straight back to Teutoburg's clearing. Politically, the battle became a cautionary tale for empires throughout history. Napoleon studied it before invading Russia. The British referenced it during the American Revolution. The lesson was clear: no matter how advanced your armies, a land that refuses to be ruled will always find ways to resist. Modern Germany's fierce regional identities, Bavaria's separateness, Prussia's militarism, sprang from this fragmented, unconquered past. While France and Spain coalesced around Roman foundations, Germany's map remained a patchwork of duchies and kingdoms until the 19th century, its fractures echoing ancient tribal boundaries. Yet the most enduring legacy might be psychological. For Rome, Teutoburg was a wound that never fully healed. The Lost Legions numbers 17th, 18th, 19th were permanently retired, the only such case in Roman history. Emperors avoided ambitious northern expansions, fearing another Arminius might be waiting. The empire's confidence, once limitless, now carried a whisper of doubt. Augustus reportedly refused to let his hair be cut or his nails trimmed for months after the disaster, as if personal mourning could atone for strategic failure. For Germania, the victory was equally transformative. Tribes that had warred for generations briefly united under Arminius, planting the seed of a shared identity. Though they quickly splintered again, the legend of Teutoburg lived on in oral traditions, resurfacing during the Protestant Reformation and Napoleonic Wars as proof of Germanic resilience. When modern Germany unified in 1871, Arminius renamed Hermann became a national symbol, his monument near Detmold standing as tall as the Statue of Liberty. The battle's echoes even shaped language. The English word Germany derives from Julius Caesar's term for the region, while Deutsch comes from the Old High German, Deutsch, meaning of the people, a linguistic divide mirroring the ancient rift between Roman and unconquered lands. Names matter, and Teutoburg ensured two Europes would emerge, one that saw itself as Rome's heir and one that never bowed. Today, walking through the quiet groves of Kalkriese, it's hard to grasp how deeply this place changed history. Had Varus won, Europe might speak Latin from the Rhine to the Baltic. Christianity could have spread north centuries sooner. The Viking Age, the Holy Roman Empire, even world wars might have unfolded along unrecognizable lines. But the forest had other plans. In the end, Teutoburg wasn't just a battle, it was the moment Europe's twin souls, Roman order and Germanic independence, were forged in fire and rain. The continent we know exists because 20,000 men vanished into the mud, and an empire learned the hard way that some lines can't be crossed. Among the countless mysteries surrounding Teutoburg, few are as tantalizing as the whispers of Roman survivors who didn't just escape, they vanished into legend. While most scholars accept the legions were annihilated, rogue theories suggest small bands slipped through the slaughter, fleeing so far east that their footsteps vanish into the mists of ancient trade routes. The most persistent claim that some reached China, the idea isn't entirely far-fetched. Rome and Han China were aware of each other's existence, linked by the sprawling Silk Road. Chinese chronicles from the 1st century mention encounters with strange, armored men near the Tarim Basin, their descriptions eerily reminiscent of legionaries, tall, fair-haired fighters who marched in lockstep and carried rectangular shields. In the 1950s, a Swedish archaeologist even claimed to find Roman-style helmets in western China, though the artifacts later proved to be medieval Mongol gear. The real smoking gun would have been the ruins of a Roman-style fort discovered in Gansu province in the 2000s, dubbed Lycian, a name some argue derives from legion. Excavations revealed nothing conclusively Roman, just ambiguous pottery shards and the wishful thinking of overeager theorists. Deeper scrutiny unravels the romance. No Chinese texts describe Latin speakers or Mediterranean features among these supposed foreigners. The Lycian connection relies on linguistic gymnastics, a modern village name twisted to fit a pre-existing narrative. Genetic studies of locals showed no significant European ancestry, and the fort's layout aligns with standard Han military architecture. Even if a handful of legionaries had trekked thousands of miles through hostile steppes and deserts, why would China's meticulous historians omit such a spectacle? The Han kept detailed records of foreign envoys, from Parthian traders to Scythian horsemen. A lost Roman unit would have been a bureaucratic curiosity, not a footnote lost to time. Another theory posits the survivors turned mercenary, offering their skills to Eurasian tribes. Some historians point to the Kingdom of Kushan in modern-day Afghanistan, where 2nd century art occasionally depicts soldiers in what looks like segmented armor. But Kushan's military borrowed from everyone Greek, Persian, Indian, making it impossible to isolate Roman influence. More tellingly, no Kushan records mention foreign recruits matching legionary descriptions. Claims that these men intermarried and faded into local populations ignore the stark reality. Rome's military culture was insular. Legionaries took oaths to their standards, not the highest bidder. The silence of archaeology speaks loudest. Had even a single century reached China, their equipment would have been priceless curiosities preserved in tombs or traded as exotic relics. Yet no gladius has ever surfaced in Asian soil, no Lorica segmentata plates nestled beside jade and silk. Contrast this with Viking artifacts found as far as Baghdad or Chinese porcelain in Egyptian digs. Distance alone didn't prevent cultural exchange. Absence of evidence here suggests evidence of absence. Perhaps the most glaring hole in these theories is logistical. Escapees wouldn't have headed east, they'd have fled west toward the Rhine and safety. The route to China meant crossing the territories of tribes who just helped annihilate their comrades. Even if they avoided detection, survival required stealing food, navigating language barriers, and treating wounds in an era when infection killed as surely as swords. The notion of bedraggled legionaries traversing thousands of miles without leaving a single artifact or credible account stretches plausibility to breaking point. That hasn't stopped the myths from flourishing. In Uzbekistan, locals speak of red-haired ghosts haunting the Pamir Mountains, while a Georgian folktale describes armored giants defending a remote pass. These stories share a pattern, vague similarities magnified by time and wishful thinking. The real fate of any survivors was likely grim and unremarkable captivity, assimilation, or slow starvation in a forest that offered no quarter. Yet the allure of lost legions persists because it answers a deeper hunger. History dislikes loose ends, and Teutoburg's scale demands an epilogue grander than they all died. We want to believe in rogue centurions becoming Silk Road bodyguards or battle-hardened veterans carving out hidden kingdoms. But sometimes the truth is simpler and sadder. When the last echoes of combat faded in Teutoburg, so did the legions themselves, not into legend, but into the quiet anonymity of unmarked graves. The forest took them, and it keeps its secrets well. The legend of the Lost Legion has seeped into modern pop culture like blood into the soil of Kalkriese, morphing with each retelling to serve new agendas. In late 19th century Germany, the battle became a nationalist rallying cry, with Arminius rebranded as Hermann, a transformed into a blonde, sword-wielding demigod. Monumental paintings depicted him as a Teutonic superhero, bathed in celestial light while Roman invaders cowered at his feet, the most blatant example. The towering Hermannsdenkmal monument near Detmold, completed in 1875, its bronze hero glaring toward France, a deliberate symbol of German unity forged against external threats. These works weren't history, they were propaganda, weaponizing Teutoburg to fuel Wilhelmine militarism and later Nazi obsession with racial purity. Holleland took the opposite approach, often framing the legions as tragic heroes betrayed by barbarian cunning. The 1967 film, The Last Roman, reduced Arminius to a snarling villain, while wide-eyed centurions struggled valiantly against the savage hordes. More nuanced portrayals emerged in the 21st century, like the 2013 miniseries, The Roman Empire, which painted Varus as a corrupt bureaucrat and Arminius as a conflicted insurgent. Yet even these leaned into familiar tropes, the noble savage versus the decadent empire, oversimplifying a conflict where both sides committed atrocities. Video games have perhaps done the most to revive interest in the Lost Legions, albeit with creative liberties. Total War Rome Roman 2 lets players rewrite history, leading Germanic tribes to repeat Teutoburg's ambush or guiding Rome to avenge it. The forest is rendered in eerie detail, fog curling between oaks as unseen warriors launch javelins from the brush. But the most haunting depiction comes from Expeditions Rome, where players discover a survivor's camp years after the battle. Broken men clinging to fraying discipline, their armor rusted, their Latin peppered with Germanic loanwords. It's a poignant what-if that underscores how deeply the disaster resonates. Literature has taken the darkest turns. Harry Turtledove's alternate history novel, Give Me Back My Legions, imagines Augustus sending a vengeful Germanicus to raise Germania, while Rebecca Lochland's The Ghosts of Teutoburg explores the battle through a druidess's eyes, framing it as a clash of spiritual energies. Even children's books aren't immune. One German picture book from the 1930s showed cherubic Aryan children reenacting the ambush with wooden swords, a chilling example of how myth can be weaponized for indoctrination. What unites these portrayals, from jingoistic statues to nuanced games, is their shared recognition of Teutoburg's power as a story. It's not just a battle, it's a canvas for our deepest anxieties about betrayal, hubris, and identity. Whether cast as heroes or fools, the Lost Legion endures because they represent the ultimate cautionary tale. No empire, no matter how mighty, is immune to the reckoning that comes when it overreaches. And perhaps that's why their ghosts still haunt our screens and pages, not as historical figures, but as mirrors reflecting our own fragile civilizations. By the 19th century, the damp earth of Teutoburg had long since swallowed the last traces of Roman armor, but the battle was resurrected with a vengeance in the German imagination. As fragmented states sought unity under a burgeoning nationalist movement, Arminius underwent a startling transformation from obscure tribal leader to mythic founding father. No longer just a man who'd bested 3 legions, he became Hermann der Cherusker, a golden-haired demigod sculpted to fit the needs of a nation searching for ancient heroes. The shift began after Napoleon's conquests humiliated German-speaking lands, igniting a desperate need for symbols of resistance. Writers like Heinrich von Kleist recast Teutoburg as a primal struggle between noble German freedom and corrupt Latin tyranny. His 1809 play, Die Hermannschlacht, depicted Rome as a stand-in for French invaders, with Arminius delivering rousing speeches about ancestral soil that audiences instantly recognized as calls to modern rebellion. The forest ambush was no longer history, it was propaganda, repurposed to stoke anti-Napoleonic fervor. Visual art amplified the myth. Massive canvases by painters like Johann Peter Janssen showed Arminius bathed in angelic light, his raised sword cleaving through cowering legionaries. These works deliberately echoed religious iconography, positioning him as a secular messiah leading his people to salvation. The most audacious expression came with the Hermannsdenkmal, a colossal statue near Detmold unveiled in 1875. Towering over the surrounding hills, its bronze Hermann glared westward toward France, clutching a 7-meter sword inscribed, "German unity is my strength." The message was explicit. The fragmented German states must unite against external threats, just as tribes had against Rome. This manufactured legend reached grotesque extremes under the Nazis, who weaponized Teutoburg as proof of Aryan superiority. School textbooks portrayed the battle as racial purification, with pure-blooded Germans expelling foreign racial poison. Heinrich Himmler personally funded excavations at Kalkriese, hoping to unearth artifacts that would link SS troops directly to Arminius's warriors. The Nazi version erased all nuance. Rome became a Jewish-tainted empire, while Arminius was reinvented as a proto-fascist enforcing blood and soil ideology. Yet the myth's resilience reveals an uncomfortable truth. All nations rewrite history to serve their present. The same battle that 19th-century liberals used to advocate for democracy was later twisted to justify totalitarianism. Even today, far-right groups across Europe invoke Hermann as a symbol of ethnic resistance, while leftists reclaim him as a multicultural icon, proof that Germania's tribes were always diverse coalitions. The real Arminius, a Roman-educated pragmatist who likely saw himself as a tribal leader rather than a nationalist icon, is buried under centuries of political baggage. Perhaps the ultimate irony, the monument meant to celebrate German unity became a divider. The Hermannsdenkmal was built in Detmold not for historical accuracy, Kalkriese lies far north, but because local nobles funded it. Modern archaeologists shake their heads at its inaccuracies. Hermann's sword is a medieval design, his armor pure fantasy. Yet the statue endures, less a tribute to ancient history than a mirror reflecting how each generation molds the past to fit its fears and fantasies. The lost legions may have vanished, but their shadows still stretch across our politics, proving that some battles never truly end. Recent excavations at Kalkriese continue to peel back layers of the Teutoburg mystery, revealing surprises that challenge even long-held assumptions. In 2021, archaeologists uncovered something startling beneath a previously overlooked mound, a cluster of Roman surgical instruments, their bronze handles still gleaming faintly after 2 millennia. These weren't battlefield loot, they were carefully buried, arranged in a way that suggests a field hospital's last stand. The presence of a surgeon's tools, bone saws, probes, even a vaginal speculum hints at desperate attempts to save lives amid the carnage, painting a grimmer picture than the quick slaughter historians imagined. Nearby, a child's skeleton with a partially healed leg fracture was found beside a woman's remains, their positioning implying protection rather than panic. This single discovery rewrote narratives. Civilians weren't just caught in the crossfire, they were integral to the Roman column, and their deaths were methodical, not incidental. Groundbreaking technology is allowing researchers to reconstruct the battle's timeline with eerie precision. Soil analysis now detects microscopic metal particles from blood and weapons, creating a heat map of violence intensity. The results, 3 distinct killing zones spaced 2 miles apart, each with unique weapon signatures. The first zone shows mostly Germanic spearheads and arrowheads, the initial ambush. The second is littered with Roman pila javelins, evidence of a failed counterattack. The third, most chillingly, contains almost no weapons at all, just scattered nails from sandals and belt buckles, proof the final hours were less a battle than a massacre of disarmed men. LiDAR scans have also revealed artificial earthworks previously dismissed as natural features. These weren't just hiding spots for warriors, but pre-built traps funneling Romans into dead ends like cattle in a slaughter chute. Perhaps the most provocative find emerged in 2023, a silver coin hoard buried near the battlefield's edge, its latest coin minted in 8 AD, just a year before the disaster. Normally, such caches would be attributed to looting, but these coins were meticulously sorted by type and wrapped in birch bark, a material Romans never used. The prevailing theory, a Germanic warrior's personal savings hidden before battle and never reclaimed. This tiny detail humanizes the barbarians in ways textbooks rarely do, not as mindless killers, but as men with futures worth saving. Even more telling, some coins bear tiny countermarks, crude Germanic runes overlaying Augustus's face. It's not just defacement, it's a deliberate erasure of Roman identity, a symbolic reclaiming of land and liberty. The human toll is coming into sharper focus thanks to isotopic analysis of teeth from mass graves. Scientists can now trace a legionary's birthplace by comparing the minerals in their enamel to regional water sources. The results are heartbreakingly diverse: North African olive farmers, Iberian shepherds, even Syrian city dwellers, all united in death under German soil. One skeleton, identified as a Gaul by his dental strontium levels, showed signs of childhood rickets followed by years of military rations, a rags-to-legionary story cut short at Kalkriese. Another had healed fractures matching descriptions of Roman shield wall tactics. His bones, a living record of prior battles, survived, only to meet oblivion in the mud. Ongoing work at the site now extends beyond the battlefield itself. Researchers are mapping a network of pre-Roman Germanic trails, discovering that what Varus thought were hidden paths were actually well-traveled routes known to local tribes. This wasn't just a random forest, it was a landscape as familiar to Arminius as Rome's Forum was to Varus. Even the weather is being re-examined. Tree ring data from nearby bogs confirms 19 AD as one of the wettest autumns in centuries, vindicating ancient accounts of drowning men and waterlogged equipment. The most tantalizing mystery remains the legion's sacred eagle standards, symbols of Roman pride never recovered. Recently, ground-penetrating radar detected anomalous metal deposits deep beneath a sacred spring near Detmold, too deep for conventional excavation. Are these the lost eagles cast into watery graves as offerings to Germanic gods, or merely geological quirks? Future digs may tell, but for now they serve as a reminder. Teutoburg's earth still clutches its secrets tightly. Every shovel of dirt overturned at Kalkriese doesn't just reveal bones and metal. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that history's greatest disasters are never as simple as victors and vanquished. They're messy, human, and always more complicated than we imagine. The disaster at Teutoburg Forest wasn't just a military defeat, it was a masterclass in how empires unravel. At its core, the catastrophe exposed 3 fatal flaws that echo through history: the arrogance of assumed superiority, the peril of ignoring local knowledge, and the illusion that brute force alone can tame resistance. Rome didn't just lose 20,000 men that day, it received a warning written in blood, one that modern powers ignore at their own risk. Take the curse of overconfidence. Varus didn't march blindly into that forest because he was incompetent, he did it because Rome had spent centuries winning. From Carthage to Gaul, their playbook never failed: bring overwhelming force, impose order, and watch the conquered embrace civilization. But Germania shattered that myth. The tribes didn't crave Roman baths or laws, they valued freedom over stability. Varus's real mistake wasn't tactical, it was assuming his enemy wanted what he was selling. We've seen this script replay endlessly: the British in Afghanistan, the Americans in Vietnam, even the Soviets in the same mountains where Alexander faltered. Invaders always believe their system is irresistible until the land itself rises against them. Then there's terrain, not just as geography, but as a living adversary. Roman legions were engineered for open battle, where discipline and formation trumped individual bravery. But in Teutoburg's tangled undergrowth, their strengths became liabilities. Heavy armor slowed movement, tight formations collapsed into chaos. Cavalry was useless without room to charge. Contrast this with Arminius's forces, who treated the forest like a second skin. They knew where the ground would bog under rain, which ravines were death traps, even how sound carried differently at dawn versus dusk. Modern militaries still grapple with this lesson. Think of the French at Dien Bien Phu, surrounded by Vietnamese highlands they dismissed as primitive, or the Russians in Ukraine's muddy spring roads, their tanks sinking into the same muck that swallowed Varus's men. But perhaps the most enduring lesson is about allies, or rather, the illusion of them. Arminius wasn't some outsider whispering lies. He was Rome's own cavalry officer, a man who'd earned the golden rings of trust. His betrayal wasn't just personal, it revealed the empire's fatal blindness to the hearts of those it ruled. Rome thought hostages educated in Latin and military tactics would become loyal proxies. Instead, they created perfect double agents. History brims with parallels, the CIA's Afghan mujahideen morphing into the Taliban, or colonial armies turning their guns on imperial masters. When you train locals in your own methods without understanding their loyalties, you're not building allies, you're crafting your own executioners. The battle's aftermath offers a fourth, darker insight: the limits of revenge. Rome's eventual retaliation under Germanicus was tactically brilliant, burning villages, poisoning wells, even unearthing Teutoburg's mass graves to rebury the dead with honor. But it achieved nothing. Germania remained unconquered, its tribes more united in hatred than ever. Vengeance, no matter how brutal, couldn't reverse the strategic reality. Some lands digest invaders rather than bow to them. The same pattern unfolded with the Mongols abandoning Hungary's marshes or America's Pyrrhic victories in Iraq. You can punish a people, but you can't force them to accept your vision of order. Yet for all its warnings, Teutoburg's greatest lesson might be about humility. Rome's eventual response wasn't just rage, it was institutional learning. Future campaigns in Britain and Dacia would rely on deep reconnaissance, local guides, and flexible tactics. The empire didn't abandon expansion, it grew wiser about where and how to push. That adaptability kept Rome dominant for centuries after this defeat. The true marker of strength isn't never failing, it's learning why you fell, then adjusting your stride. In that sense, the ghosts of Teutoburg whisper not just to generals, but to anyone who believes their power makes them invincible. The forest always remembers. The land always fights back, and history's darkest pages are filled with those who forgot. Walking through the Teutoburg Forest today, you'd hardly guess this tranquil stretch of oak and beech was once the stage for one of history's most devastating ambushes. The air hums with birdsong, not war cries. The only arrows here belong to woodpeckers tapping at ancient bark. Yet beneath this serene surface, the land remembers. At Kalkriese, the epicenter of the battle, the earth has been sculpted into an open-air museum where history bleeds through the soil. A wooden observation tower rises like a sentinel, offering panoramic views of the massacre's killing grounds, now peaceful fields etched with walking trails marked by Roman-style mileposts. The most striking feature, a 300-meter-long metal wall slicing through the landscape, its perforated surface casting dagger-like shadows. This is no ordinary fence, it's a haunting art installation representing the invisible divide between order and chaos, between the Roman column's formation and its disintegration. Step inside the Kalkriese Museum, and the battle snaps into chilling focus. Glass floors reveal excavated soil layers strewn with artifacts left exactly where they fell. A spearhead wedged in a ribcage, a sandal nail still caked in mud from its owner's final steps. One display case holds a rare Roman face mask helmet, its hollow eyes staring blankly across centuries, while another cradles the skeleton of a mule, its vertebrae showing slash marks from Germanic axes. But it's the small touches that resonate most: a child's leather shoe, a dice carved from bone, a wax tablet whose words dissolved into the earth. these aren't relics, they're echoes of real lives abruptly severed. The museum's piece de resistance, a 3D battle simulation projecting the ambush onto a topographical model, lighting up kill zones with crimson highlights as narration from Tacitus's accounts booms overhead. You don't just learn about Teutoburg here, you feel its weight. A short drive north lies Detmold, home to the Hermannstenkmal, a colossal statue of Arminius looming 53 meters over the tree line. Unveiled in 1875, this nationalist monument reimagines the Germanic leader as a muscle-bound titan, his sword eternally raised toward France. Climb the spiral staircase inside his pedestal, and you'll find exhibits dissecting how 19th-century Germans weaponized the battle to fuel unification myths. It's a stark reminder that history is never just about the past. It's a mirror reflecting whatever ideals we thrust upon it. Nearby, the Lippisches Landesmuseum houses lesser-known treasures. A Roman gladius recovered from a peat bog, its blade still sharp enough to draw blood, and a Germanic shield boss dented by pilum strikes, tangible proof of the clash's brutality. For those craving immersion, the forest itself offers walking trails following the legion's doomed route. Signs along the path recount the battle in 3 languages, with QR codes linking to augmented reality recreations. Hold up your phone, and the trees fade into digital legionaries marching to their doom. The Arnulf Trail, named after a local farmer who first reported Roman artifacts in the 1980s, winds past reconstructed Germanic pit traps and the infamous Nick, a sharp bend where Arminius's forces split the Roman column like a wedge. At dusk, when mist slithers between the oaks, it's easy to imagine shapes moving just beyond sight. Every September, history buffs converge here for reenactment festivals where Romans in hand-made lorica segmentata trade insults with woad-painted warriors. The authenticity is staggering. Blacksmiths forge replica peeler over charcoal pits, while Germanic women demonstrate how to weave camouflage cloaks from nettle fibers. But the real magic happens during the night march, when hundreds of torchbearers retrace the legion's final hours. As flames flicker over the same mud that once swallowed an army, the distance between past and present blurs. Yet Kalkriese isn't frozen in time. Ongoing excavations mean visitors might stumble upon archaeologists brushing dirt from newly unearthed artifacts, a belt buckle one day, a cavalry spur the next. The site's director, Dr. Stefan Burmeister, often gives impromptu tours, pointing out where ground-penetrating radar recently revealed a suspected mass grave. This isn't just a museum, he says, kneeling beside a flag marking a fresh dig. It's a crime scene where the evidence still speaks. The Teutoburg Forest today isn't merely a memorial to a battle, it's a dialogue between what was and what we've made of it. Whether you come for the history, the hiking, or the haunting sense of standing where empires trembled, this land leaves no visitor unchanged. The trees may have grown taller, but their roots still clutch the bones of the lost. And if you listen closely, the wind through the leaves might just sound like whispers in Latin. The story of Varus's lost legions isn't just a tale of ancient battle, it's a riddle wrapped in the fog of 2,000 years. Even now, as archaeologists brush dirt from newly unearthed bones and historians debate the finer points of Roman logistics, this disaster refuses to surrender its secrets. What makes Teutoburg so endlessly fascinating isn't just the scale of the defeat, but the gaps in our knowledge that let imagination rush in. Were there survivors who vanished into the Germanic wilderness? Did any legionaries escape eastward, their stories lost to time? And what of the eagles, those sacred standards that Rome would spend decades trying to recover? Every answer we dig up seems to birth 3 new questions. This isn't just academic curiosity. Teutoburg resonates because it's a mirror held up to our own world. In an age of superpowers and insurgencies, the lessons feel unnervingly modern. The dangers of cultural arrogance, the limits of military might, the way geography can turn from backdrop to executioner. The forest didn't just swallow an army, it exposed the fragility of empires. When Augustus cried out for his lost legions, he was mourning more than soldiers. He was grieving the illusion of invincibility. Yet for all we've uncovered, the battlefield still whispers. Kalkriese's soil yields fresh revelations with each passing year. A surgeon's tools here, a defaced coin there. Each artifact adding a brushstroke to a painting we'll never fully see. That incompleteness is why Teutoburg endures. It's not a closed chapter, but an open wound in history, one that still draws explorers armed with shovels or satellite imagery, all hoping to glimpse the truth beneath the roots. So what do you think happened in those blood-soaked days? Did the legions fight to the last man, or did some slip away to forge new lives far from Rome's reach? The conversation doesn't end here. Share your theories below, or better yet, walk the trails of Kalkriese yourself. Stand where the oaks once echoed with war cries, touch the same earth that cradled the fallen, and listen for the echoes of a battle that still shapes our world. The forest remembers. The only question is, will you join the hunt to uncover what it's been keeping all this